Shalom. Hi, everybody. So if you're on the West Coast, it's late at night. I hope you had a good day. If you're on the East Coast, what are you doing up? And I'm in Israel, so we think it's 10 o'clock in the morning. But what do we know, right? But does anybody know? We just got back from a week in Tel Aviv. We're back in Yerushalayim. And this week's Parsha, which I apologize for doing late, but it had to do with our travels and what we were doing and everything going on, is Parshat VaYera, when God appears in our lives. And I think it's fortuitous that I'm doing it this morning and not before, because last night we went on this wonderful group experience with this lovely guide, Yuval, who began by explaining that he's chiloni, that he's secular. And my contention is there's no such thing as secular. Chiloni means kind of normal, maybe not defined by religious aspects or what have you. But here in Israel, everybody is that's Jewish is living these Jewish lives, and we would not, by U.S. standards, necessarily call them secular. So I am going to suggest that once again, translations are interpretations and fall short of conveying what it means. As he was taking this tour, this group that we were with, of Jews who ranged from being observant to not particularly ritualistically observant, and Christians and all that, there was God, there was spirituality, there was all over the place. So the title of this week's Parsha is When God Appears in Our Lives, and I was thinking about that as Yuval was explaining his perspective of what it means to be here in Israel. We are all familiar with the poem Footprints that appears in various iterations about God's being with us in our lives. The writer asks, why is it that God, when things were good, I noticed God's being there, but when there were two sets of footprints, that's how the writer knows. But when things were not good, the writer suggests, I only saw one set of footprints. God responds in the poem, because, my dear one, I was carrying you at those times. Those were my footprints. The one set was mine. Are we all cognizant of God's presence in our lives? And do we show recognition of this presence and acknowledgement of the blessing of walking with God, as we learn in Sotah 14a? In the midst of a discussion about why we do not know where Moshe is buried and the limitations of humanity in terms of interacting with God, we learn as follows. V'amar Rabbi Chama b'Rabbi Chanina, mai tichtiv acharei Hashem Elokechem telchu, v'chi afshar lo la'adam le'alech akar shchina, v'lo kvar ne'amar ki Hashem Elokecha esh ochlahu. Rabbi Chama says in the name of Rabbi Chanina, why is it written after God, you shall walk, telchu, you shall go? So before I even get into this, let's suggest that go and walk are not necessarily the same thing. We go. Walking is a physical activity. Going might be much more. Is it possible for the human being to walk with God, to walk after the Shekhinah, God's presence? Didn't we already say that the Lord God, your God, will be a fire that will consume? And this is what Moshe realizes when Moshe sees the ish, the fire of the burning bush. We then go on in the Sugya, and it says, to walk after God, we walk after the deeds, after the measures, after the characteristics of God. As God clothed the naked in Gan Eden, it is written, God made these clothes of skin, these coverings of skin, and covered the human beings. So, that is how we clothe the naked, and by doing so, replicate the actions of God. The Kadosh Baruch Hu visits the sick, as we know. VaYera elav Hashem b'alanei mamreh. After Abraham had circumcised himself and his family, God appears to him in his location. Therefore, we do bikor cholim. We visit the sick, and when we do so, we bring God into the world. So God appears in our lives when we bring God into our lives. And then the Sugya gives two more examples. As God comforts the mourners, which God did after the death of Abraham, and God blessed Yitzhak his son, so we too do Nichum Avlim. We comfort the mourners, and as God buries those that die, as God buried Moshe, then we too bury our dead. In other words, according to Rabbi Yechama, in the name of Rabbi Hanina, we are to be aware of God's appearances and then act accordingly and bring those appearances into the human realm. This is precisely how our Parsha begins. Now, God appeared in the plains of Mamre, the exact piece that was quoted in the Sugya from the Talmud. VaYera Elav Hashem be'elenei Mamre. God appears in Elenei Mamre, and Avraham v'hu yashav petach ha'ohel kachom hayom. Avram is sitting in the opening of his tent when the day was hot. So we learn also from Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, the same one who spoke in the name of his father in the earlier text, that it was the third day from Avram's circumcision. The Holy One, blessed be God, came and inquired about Avram's welfare. So we know that the third day after any kind of procedure is the most painful, interesting, and that is the day, Dafka, specifically, that Avram welcomes the guests. He lifts up his eyes, Avram, and he sees, and behold, bring understanding before him. He sees them, and he runs toward them from the entrance of his tent, and he bows to the ground. All of this we must imagine in the human realm being very, very painful. So this appearance may appear as dreamlike, but the use of the word nitzavim, which we've seen before, and we have this notion that nitzavim means like standing at attention, matzah, a situation. It is not walking by or standing occasionally to look at something very quickly. Avram then says, my gods, my lords, my people, if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant. Instead, let me take a little bit of water. I will bathe your feet. I will recline and allow you to recline under my tree. I will take bread. I will sustain your hearts, and I will take care of you. Why? Kain avartam al avadchem v'yamuken yasek hasher dibarta. Because you have passed by your servant, being him, and I will do, and they say, so shall you do. Avram then goes to Sarah. He says, make these cakes, make these this food for our guests, and of course the preparations of accommodating them continue. As we spoke last week, Avram and God come to an understanding of each other. And in his imperfect human state, as Abraham recognizes that God has appeared, Avram goes about doing what he can in the human realm, welcoming his guests, though he does not know them per se, gives them some respite from the heat, nourishment for their bodies, and involves Sarah in these mitzvot. As we spoke last week, and we talked about the increasing degree of interaction between Avram and God in verbiage, in words, and then in deeds, we now see it is very present in not just Avram's deeds, but in taking initiative. Remember the notion that as we go with this theme of God's appearance in our lives, we're also paralleling that with the notion that each generation to earn this Yerusha, to earn this inheritance, has to add something. So in every case, we're seeing these additional actions that indicate knowledge of the presence of God and knowledge of walking with God in the language of the piece from the Gemara. Notice the great lengths to which Avram goes to perform this mitzvah of hachnasat orchim. Rambam teaches that when one begins a mitzvah in the largesse, there is an obligation to complete it. So one could say you gave him food. One could say you dressed him. You could say, but what we're saying, what we're suggesting here is that these actions are part of a larger frame of mitzvah. That mitzvah is a continuous action. Think about, for example, when we wash our hands before eating bread, we don't talk between the bracha for washing our hands and the eating of bread. Now, technically we're doing two things, but they join together to perform, to add up to one composite mitzvah. As Rambam teaches that one is obligated to complete a mitzvah when God appeared to Avraham, it is this understanding that appeared as well. In other words, this is the additional piece of the puzzle that's being put in now. You may have heard me speak in past shiurim about the important message of Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Steven Spielberg. What is so interesting is that this story was formulated as Stephen himself was coming to a better understanding of the appearance of God in his life. As the story unfolds, and if you barely remember it, I recommend reacquainting yourself with it and have a sharp a pen to take notes. It's a fascinating story of understanding appearance and completing a journey. There's an appearance of something that people are very uncertain about. And many of those who do notice it ignore it because it's so aberrant. Or if they start to follow the appearance, they stop at various points. While at the center of the story is the person who has to complete the journey that he began, just as we complete mitzvot that we commence doing, and is joined with the source of the appearance at the end of the movie, which we are still not sure of. And by the way, the book and the movie follow each other very well, because there's this dream-like quality to it, perhaps like Avram had in Elene Mamre, and we're not clear that, what is really going on and what is sort of appears to be going on. But by the end of the story, for the central character, all of that comes together. This is what Avram does here in our narrative. Avram completes the journey of the mitzvah of achnasat orchim, following the appearance of God, to which he is compelled to fully and completely respond. As we continue the narrative, the true purpose of this appearance is made clear. We continue in our text. And they say to him, "Ayeh Sarah ishtecha, where's Sarah, your wife?" And he says, "Behold, in the tent." He says, and then the speaker says, "I will surely return to you at this time next year. And what will happen? V'hinei ben l'Sarah ishtecha, and Sarah, your wife, will have a child." Now, Sarah hears this from the entrance of the tent. And we know Sarah will laugh, right? Sarah has not completed the same journey that Avram has. Right now, Sarah is on Avram's journey. Just as Yitzchak was on, Yitzchak is on Avram's journey, as we discussed last week, until he added something to make his journey specifically his. Think about it. Our parents, those of us that are children of immigrants or children of immigrants, the parents see something, it's not good. They begin a journey. But beginning a journey is not enough. They begin the journey. They come to their land of focus where they're headed toward. They have children. The children live in that land. Every generation adds. So what we have here is a situation where, similar to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where people do not take the journey at the same rate, and sometimes they lop off. Sarah is perhaps on this journey with Avram in terms of her understanding the appearance of God, but might not be exactly at the same point yet. And we'll see that play out next week, actually, in Parshat VaYera. So Avram and Sarah are old, and Sarah had ceased to be able to have children in her mind. So this is when Vatitzchak Sarah Bekirba, Sarah laughs in her head, right? And she says, "Really, I'm going to have a child? Are you kidding me?" And God asks Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why? Because God, perhaps, again, modeling and using human language to explain that which we can't, perhaps has a sense that Avram will understand the question, Sarah will not. So at this point, when God says, "Hayipalem Hashem davar," does anything get hidden from God? I'm telling you, at this point next year, you and Sarah will have a child of your own. So we are reading about the interconnectedness of God's journey and that of Abraham, and his reboot of humanity, or at least of monotheists, and of course our history as Jews. Avram and Sarah will have a child who will continue this line that God has chosen to represent so much of what God is in the world which God created. Everything goes back to Ribbono Shel Olam, God, creator of the world. This is the coming together that begins with a direction of Lech Lecha. So Lech Lecha began the process. Again, close encounters. They begin the journey. They go. Some don't continue. And the one who continues and gets to the end understands the point of the journey. So we began this in Lech Lecha. It's amplified in VaYera. This journey and this interfacing and interaction of God and Avram is amplified by the experiences of VaYera and by the various nisyonot, the various tests that Avraham will have. Appearances do not count unless both the one who is appearing and the one who perceives the appearance are both tuned in with each other. This is the crux of the story being told. One can talk. I'm talking right now, right? Am I talking into the ether? Communication happens when we interact. That's obviously the limitation of teaching or learning in this format. But hopefully through questions and interactions and conversations and using the information, that's where the interaction will be completed or continued. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zechrono L'Shalom, suggests in understanding what is unfolding here, this chapter, at first glance, seems simple, almost fable-like. However complex and ambiguous, Rabbi Sacks teaches there are three sections here. 1, verse 1, God appears to Avram. 2 to 16, Avram meets the angels, or the men, the people that he perceives are at his tent. And 17 to 33 is the dialogue between God and Avraham, and stepping it up yet one more step, the fate of stone. And the fate of stone is interesting because Avram again will begin another journey here to try to save the folks of stone. But like Close Encounters, given that there are not enough or even 10 in the narrative to go along with him, that journey, that initiative will not be completed. The relationship between these sections is far from clear. Do they represent one scene, two, or three separate ones? The most obvious possibility is three. Each of the above sections can be seen as a separate event. God's appearance to Avram, God's conversation with the Malachim, with the folks that come, and the dialogue between God and Avram about stone. First, God appears to Avram, as Rashi explains, to visit the sick after Avram's circumcision, back to our Gemara. Then the visitors arrive with the news that Sarah will have a child. Then takes place the great dialogue about justice and imminent punishment of the people of Sodom. I would submit that all of this is about appearances and being seen and acknowledged. Avram acknowledges God's appearance. Avram acknowledges that of the angels and the visitors. And finally, though it does not meet with the same success, Avram acknowledges the potential individuality of the members of the collective of stone. Rabbi Sacks continues, Maimonides suggests that there are only two scenes. So those three scenes is my understanding of it. Maimonides suggests that there are only two scenes, the visit of the angels and the dialogue with God. The first verse does not describe an event at all. Rather, it is a chapter heading. In other words, the way Rambam is suggesting is God's appearance to Avram. Avram meets the angels. Avram discusses with God what the deal is with stone. It tells us that the events that follow are all part of a prophetic revelation, a divine human encounter. The third possibility is that we have a single continuous scene. God appears to Avram, but before God can speak, Avram sees the passerbys and asks God to wait while he serves them food. Only when they have departed does he then turn to God and the conversation begins. So in this reading that Rabbi Sacks is suggesting, you have God appears to Avram. Avram perceives that God is there, but also perceives these visitors come and something needs to be done. He says to God, so to speak, wait, I need to do this first. I need to do this mitzvah first before I can find out what your appearance is about. And then the conversation occurs. So any of these are possible, but all of them entail engagement. and entail the beginning of something that we may or may not understand, and how we perceive it and how we work with it. Now, we're going to move on to another appearance. Later at the end of the Parsha, we read about the Akedah, the agreement of Abraham to yield to God and prepare his beloved Isaac to be given to and shared with God. Watch carefully as we go through this text how appearance is so present and specific to the one who understands the appearance. This is chapter 22 of Bereshit. Vayechar devarim ha'ele v'Elohim nisa et Abraham v'yomer elav Abraham v'yomer hineni. It comes to pass after these things that God tests Abraham, nisa, I want to come back to that word in a moment, and says to him, Abraham, and he says, here I am. So Abraham is still with God. Notice the response. He hasn't disappeared. In other words, doing these actions on the side does not take away from Avram's awareness that God is there. We are aware of God all the time, regardless of what we are doing, regardless of how many different tasks we are working, or as we like to say, multitasking. And Avram is aware of the notice. Now, the word nisa is here, and it's a really important word. Nisa is the same word as nes, or nisayon. 3 different words. Tested, nisayon, and experience, nes, miracle. Now, as I often say, translations are also interpretations. And I think translating nes as a miracle is going into a Christian context which we as Jews do not necessarily buy into. If you look up at the word nes, and I just explained this to someone yesterday as we were looking at various parts of the Old City that are important both to Jews and to non-Jews, and things that are inexplicable. And again, wonderful Yuval said, yes, it's a miracle. So I said, wait a minute. Miracle is a very nice Christian concept, but let's look at nes. If you look up the word nes in an explanatory Hebrew dictionary, in other words, not just one that gives you one word things, but like etymology and where it comes from and all that, it will say the following. A nes is something that God does, nisayon or nisa, something that human beings do, something that happens, as we say, b'minhagei ha'aretz, just in the way of the world that it goes, and the timings, manam, that bring them together. How many times have we said, this happened, and I can't understand how it all came together. So some people will say, oh, it's a miracle. And I say it's a coincidence. And for me, a coincidence is God remaining anonymous when we don't quite understand how the timing was just so perfect. So this is the testing that is going on here. Okay? God says, Kach na, please take your son. Now again, remember, God and Abraham have increased their understanding of each other. We are not dealing with the desperate or the immediate or the commanding language of lach lecha, but rather, Kach na, please take your son. And God goes on in the same formula, just like we said, leave your land, leave your birthplace, leave your father's house. So here, please take your son, your only one, the one whom you truly love, Yitzchak, and go to the land of Moriah and bring him up there for a burnt offering. Valehu sham la'olah. Bring him up there for a burnt offering. Now, using a little bit of creativity with this, you could say, bring him up there, and he will participate with you in this burnt offering. Okay, because everybody's like, God told him to sacrifice his son and to kill his son. But again, there's nuances in language here that can lead us on other paths. Avram gets up early in the morning, Vayishkam Avraham b'boker, because Avram has this thing coming up with God, and he's very excited. Again, a kind of encountered distinction to when God appears in the beginning of the Parsha, and Avram says, wait, there's this other mitzvah over here that's being that needs to be attended to. Here, Vayishkam Avraham, sleepless night, gets up early in the morning, prepares his donkey, takes his 2 servants, his helpers with him, and Yitzchak, his son. He takes the wood for the burnt offering. It says, Ve'et Yitzchak beno vayivaka atze olah. Olah is not associated with the word Yitzchak, with the name of Yitzchak. It's associated with the wood for the burnt offering. He gets up and he goes to the place which God told him. Again, preparing everything for this encounter. just as he did for his guests, with an intuitive understanding of what it would take to complete the task, the mitzvah. Not the, I ate a great mitzvah, but the entire context of everything that goes into a multifaceted mitzvah. When the third day, Avram lifts his eyes. Again, third day, remember? That's when he's circumcised. That's when the guests come. So we have parallelisms here. Our literary scholars look at this as being foretelling of what is going to happen. Just as that was successful, this will be successful as well. Avram lifts his eyes and he sees from afar. 3 days to prepare. So we see this trope in various mitzvot and scripted actions. Just as the guests come 3 days after Brit Milah, when you think about preparation for Shavuot, that's 3 days. Kabbalat HaTorah is for 3 days. I mean, this 3-day preparation thing is a trope that we see often. Avram then says to the young men, to his helpers, stay here with the donkey. I and the lad will go up, and we will prostrate ourselves. We will pray, and we will come back to you. Why? Back to Close Encounters. Maybe they did not understand. Just as many people who saw the appearance of something in Close Encounters could not complete the journey that it brought with its appearance. The appearance is not enough. The preparation, the mitzvah, the multifaceted actions that are entailed in the mitzvah, and the process itself is what completes the appearance, the one who appears and the one who sees what has appeared. Avraham then takes the wood for the burnt offering, places it, and then he takes his son, he prepares to put him on it, and he says, Isaac speaks to Avraham, his father, and he says, my father, and Avraham, again, the same response as to God, VaYomer Hineni, and he says, this is what he says, Hine ha'esh, Hine ha'etzim, VaYera. Here's the wood, here's the fire, where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham at this point is here for his son as much as he is there for God. A lot of times, a lot of our commentaries will say, how could Abraham do this? He prays for stone and he ignores his son. If you look carefully at the text, you see intentionality, you see preparation, and you see nuanced suggestions that what we think is going on is not what's going on. Again, back to Close Encounters, those that just kind of throw their hands up and say, I don't understand what's going on here. I'm getting off the boat, so to speak. God will make the lamb appear. Verse 8, Avram says, God will provide for God the lamb for the burnt offering. And what does it say then? Vayelchu shneim yachdav. They go together. They come to the place where God speaks, and Avram builds the altar there, arranges the wood, and ties up Yitzhak, his son, and places him on the altar. He stretches his hand and takes the knife. And an angel of God says, Vayomer Avraham, Avraham, Vayomer Hineni. Third time. And the angel says, God had said, Yitzhak had said, the angel says, Avram, Avram. And Avram says, Hineni. So maybe here, Avram doesn't quite understand, or Avram, maybe part of the testing is to see how does Avram bring together his interaction with his son and with God. And at this point, the angel comes in exactly at the right time, right? God's appearing anonymously, coincidence, but not a coincidence, not again in human understanding. But in God's understanding, it's exactly the way things are supposed to go. And maybe Avram understands that too. And says, do not do anything to your son. I know that you love me. And you have brought your son. You didn't even keep your son from me. You brought him on this journey with you. Avram lifts up his eyes and sees there's a ram. He puts the ram, and the ram is sacrificed. What is meant to be offered appears, the ram. Abraham acknowledges the appearance, gets the ram, offers the ram as a sacrifice to God. While many are disturbed and with understanding about how Abraham, who bargains for the people of stone, goes above and beyond, lifnim mishorat adin, above and beyond the expectations of how we act properly, some would say, to accommodate his guests, why doesn't he argue with God about this? Why doesn't he ask regarding his beloved son? Maybe it's because Avram has such emunah. Maybe Avram is so much imbued with a sense of what this appearance means that he does not need to ask. We need to ask. Sarah, as some midrashim suggest, will die from the shock of this. In other words, not reaching that same level, if you will, that Avram does. But again, how many times have you go into a prayer experience, or you go to just yesterday when we were in Yerushalayim in the old city, some people were just blown away by certain things, and other people were like walking by like, okay, it's interesting. That's it's not for me, but it's interesting. So why doesn't he argue with God? Here's a thought. Maybe it's because of familiarity. Maybe Avram, who basically had the chutzpah to tell God to wait while he dealt with his guests, knows very well how God is going to play this out. And maybe he becomes, if you will, the sociogram changes where you've got God and Avram and Yitzchak. Maybe here the sociogram changes a little bit to God and Abraham and Yitzchak. Or maybe Avram is just right in the middle. And we see that a lot as well as a trope when we will go through the texts this year, vis-a-vis the appearances of God and who understands what is going on and who does not. When we note people of faith, those who truly live by their faith, will acknowledge that God is always with them, whether carrying and supporting them in times of travail, as in the poem Footprints, or appearing to them at every step of the way. These are people of faith. This is how we understand God's presence in our lives ideally, as appearing and guiding us. It is up to us to accept the appearance and to be present as a response to God's presence. As Rabbi Harold Kushner, Zichrono L'Shalom, often explained, human beings are the language of God. We are the ones, as we began with Sotah, with the text from the Gemara, who bring God into the world by our actions replicating what God has shown us. Let us all continue to bring God into our lives in every way possible, especially at these difficult times in our fractured world. Shabbat Shalom to all. And next week I will see you at the normal time, if time is ever normal, from our home in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. Be well all and have a good week. Lihitraot.